Thank you, everyone. Welcome to the Risk and Assurance Committee meeting for Ōtorohanga District Council. You will see, obviously, I am not your independent chair, Bruce Robinson, who has been delayed by fog and is zooming in. And welcome to Matt and Lucy from Deloitte as well. We have an apology from Councillor Kloss. Do I have someone move that the Risk and Assurance Committee receive and accept the apology from Councillor Kloss for non-attendance?
No, I'll move. I'll second.
And worship. Thank you. Are there any late items from the screen? No, there are no late items. Conflicts that are declared to be declared by people? No. We've got no declaration of conflicts. Confirmation of minutes from the 24th of November.
I'll move that they be received.
So just to note that there is a correction on page 6, valuation of infrastructure assets, bullet point 4, replace fair spelled with fair, F-A-I-R. Kit move. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second it.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is the Risk and Assurance Committee work plan for 2022. I'll open that to the floor in chambers, and then we'll go to Bruce after that. Is there any comments?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Chair. So I'd just like to present our effectively draft work plan for 2022. It's based on 4 meetings per year, March, June, September, and December. You'll see in the work plan on page 11 that the December 22 and March 23 meetings are indicative depending on the incoming council and what they adopt. In terms of the work streams, a number of the items are deemed by statute effectively like annual potentially could be done in December, which I'll just quickly go down that work plan. There's potentially some other things that could be added, one of them being health and safety. So in terms of risk management, we're looking at quarterly reports on overall risk management and a quarterly risk report. So that would be quite a general type report. And a quarterly report on our capital works delivery update and risks. And then, as we talked about in the workshop before, a deep dive into potentially one of the top risks that we identify in terms of our annual refresh. And then at the conclusion of the meeting, there would be a discussion with CDLO. In terms of policy strategy input, I guess this is as and when required as these policies become due, and so that would be our sensitive expenditure type policies, fraud policies, etc. That would need to come to this meeting. So working down to insurance renewal update, that's generally done in November, so we bring that to the December meeting. And then just an update on our annual plan, which would generally be an update in March on where we're at, and then just a confirmation of at the June meeting on where we ended up. That would arrangements letter for the annual report. We're bringing that to the March meeting, and then the annual report to the September meeting, and then obviously outstanding management report matters. We would be giving an update at every quarter, and then in March determining our risk insurance committee work plan, which potentially be done in December, and then December review of that performance and effectiveness of the risk insurance committee. So, just any questions on the proposed work plan? I think I'll probably add another line in there under risk management called health and safety, and then we'll just do an annual health and safety report each quarter.
So, are there any comments from the committee? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, through you, Graham. There's nothing in the annual plan for 22-23 that would trigger an audit, which you're aware of. There's no significant changes in our annual plan for 22-23.
It wouldn't trigger an audit, but it would trigger our, if there was significant changes, our requirement to consult.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And to your knowledge at this stage, that's not an issue.
We don't believe it is. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Bruce, would you like to comment?
Thank you for that, Annette. Look, Graham, just a couple of, well, 2 or 3 comments which I just raised for the benefit of the committee, even though I'm happy to just clarify them outside the meeting. It's my first one is minor, and it actually just follows on indeed from our workshop this morning, which is with the deep dive into top risks. And I appreciate that we were at Discovery and thinking around that, and I was very encouraged, by the way, if I can say that, Annette, by the discussion this morning. It really starts to set the pathway for going forward. So thank you also to Ross and Tanya for that. I'd love to see that described as deep dive to top risks with the risk owner. I think it's really important that we describe that it's minor, but if I could just have that, please. The other thing I think you've said, you noted that, and there's been some general discussion around health and safety as a separate item in its own right, and it would be appropriate for the committee to have that each quarter, and I think you've said you'd do that. With the insurance renewal update, Graham, it would be normal, and I think it's important from a risk management perspective, that there be a briefing on what is proposed to be taken out, because insurance is just one of the tools in the toolbox for managing our risk. And I think in June or September, it would be logical for there to be a chance for the committee to understand management's view of risk that should or shouldn't be covered by way of insurance. And I would assume that certainly by September, you've had some discussion with our insurance brokers. So I think it may be at that point there is a level of either information and or decision that you might need out of them. So this is things like ability to gain cybersecurity insurance, or what are the arrangements we've got, and do they still stand from last year, etc. Even if there isn't a chance for an idea of pricing. So I would like to see a tick, which is actually what do we propose to go and buy, either in June or September, but I'll leave that to you to give us advice on when the best time is for that. The annual report, and I just wanted to check what was meant by this, because if we're reviewing accounting policy, key accounting estimates and update on asset revaluations, and say if we will, and thank you, but September's too late. If we need to do that prospectively, and that would logically be in June, because July you're actually preparing the accounts based on the policies that we're going to be happy with. The other thing that I just wondered, it would be valuable for us to have a line in here around essentially a legal risk. And probably once every 6 months, it would be important to have on the table a report in PX, might I say, on any particular legal action, risk or issue that's in front of us. And I would also suggest that that is lined up with the annual report, given some of those may also impact on what we disclose in the annual account. So that would suggest sort of like March and September. Again, I'll leave that with you to think through, but that's what I would logically do. The other thing, given, and I'm glad you're anticipating a risk committee in the new trinium, which is superb. I think under the external audit and external accountability, and it probably would come in March, and you might say this is too early, and I'll again take yours and Tanya's advice. But I think it would be appropriate to have a line and a tick in the March 2023, which was the approach to the Heaven Help Us 24-34 long-term plan. I would be keen to see that the committee keeps an eye on the project management and risk disciplines around the preparation of the LTP. Clearly, it's not a decision maker in terms of what is in the LTP, but to actually the committee to make certain that we have a plan to plan, and that we are basically on song would be an important role for the committee from probably about March 23 onwards. Appreciate it might be more towards June before you start. This is typical for local authorities, but I think it would be good to have it. So those would be my views. Happy to clarify them for the members, but I have gone through them in some detail because I think it's just useful the members here. When I look at this from what's floating around inside my head, and in fact, if there's any pushback or debate, very happy to have it.
Thank you, Bruce. Do committee members or staff have any comments on those additions? So how do we want to run this? Do we want to accept that there are some alterations in that? We don't need to run them into the recommendation specifically?
We can just say that the, through you, Madam Chair, that the work plan is adopted with the amendments identified. And the suggestion is that you can adopt your work plan rather than recommending it to council. You have the delegation to adopt your own work plan as a committee. So we can change that second recommendation to reflect that.
Okay, so based on that, then it's recommended that the Risk and Assurance Committee receive the report, titled Risk and Assurance Committee Work Plan 2022, presented by Graham Bunn, Group Manager of Business Enablement, and adopt the proposed Risk and Assurance Committee 22 Work Plan March, June, September 22 as attached in Appendix 1 and with the recommended additions as the Risk and Assurance Committee 2022 Work Plan. Do I have that?
I'm more than happy to move that.
Thank you, Your Worship, and seconded by Kit. Is that all approved?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, Graham. Next report, have we got?
Madam Chair, through you, are Deloitte staying for the whole meeting,
gonna
or are
ask
they
you.
here for their particular item and then they've got plenty to be getting on with? Just thought that I would ask whether the agenda order needs to be switched a wee bit to take their item.
Or is Matt checking in to see how we work?
Happy to do whatever the committee prefers. Some of it would be of interest to us, particularly some of the front-ended stuff. So more than happy, whatever the committee would prefer us to do.
Okay, thank you. So do we have, is Billy going to be the next one on the list? Sorry, we're just checking to see if we've got the report writer coming. Just talk amongst yourselves. Okay. Okay. So Billy's not actually in the building, so we'll move on to the next item then, and that is the outstanding management letter points. And Graham or Brendan leading that? Brendan?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairperson. So I'll take the report as being read, I guess. There were a couple of items that the TPZ raised with this Graham and myself yesterday that I'll just talk to. So one was around the first item on the table about the review of exception reports. She had a question why we'd put ongoing monthly. I guess that's because in terms of the actual control there, it's a monthly review of the reports. In terms of actually addressing this specific issue about someone outside of the process reviewing it, that's tied in with the access rights that we talk about later on, which Graham and I and Billy are hoping to sit down in a couple of weeks' time and go through that and get that sorted. So hopefully by the end of April, we should get all that in place. And then the other issue you raised was around revaluations. Yeah, and that was just about the roading revaluation. And Graham and I had a meeting with Mark about that a couple of weeks ago, where we talked about the revaluation process and where we're at and who's doing what. So that is underway at the moment, as I understand it, or at least discussions are underway. I don't think the actual work started, but yeah. So I guess, are there any questions or concerns about any of the items in there?
So just to confirm that when you say the revaluations, that's the fair value assessments? Or
it's tied in with that. So the fair value assessment is for those things that aren't scheduled to be revalued, which is roading. So in our discussion with Mark, we talked about that we'll have to do so the fair value assessments we're hoping to do it next week,
Good.
week and a half.
Good to hear.
And so once that comes out, then we'll have a better idea as to if there's additional revaluation required on top of the roading one, which is by default required under our schedule. I think, I don't know if I put this in the report or whether I just said it out loud to some people. I'm leaning towards as a possibility the waters might need to be doing as well, just because the way everything's going, and even land and buildings that they were done last year. Who knows what's happening there? So it's possible we may have to revalue everything, but hopefully in the next week or two, I will have some much clearer direction around that. And if we do, we'll start the process and then bring a report back to the committee in June as to the results of. I'll bring back the fair value report so you can have a look at it. But obviously, if that's signalling that we're going to need revaluations done, we'll get that process started before we come to the committee.
Yes, because they will need to be to Deloitte by then,
Yes.
won't they?
Yeah, well, they need to be done, dusted, and
Yes.
signed off by the time they come to the audit. So, yeah.
Good. That answers my question. Any questions from the rest of the committee members?
Through the chair, I do have one question, and we always say no question is a stupid question. I just want to know, when does a debt or when does a bill become a doubtful debt, and when does a doubtful debt become a debt?
So I guess from a trying to define a point of view, so a debt is obviously when we raise an invoice, that becomes a debt. A doubtful debt is one where, as the name suggests, it's doubtful that we're going to get it, but we don't know for sure that we're definitely not going to get it. So that when we definitely don't know we're going to get it, it becomes a bad debt, and that's usually when you write it down. This is not going right to the technical definitions under the accounting standards and stuff. So a doubtful one is one that there's a possibility we could get, possibly not. Now, in terms of a lot of our debt is rates. So we have powers under the Rating Act that means that most of those debts will never become doubtful because we can follow. If we decide to, I guess if we got to a point where council decided not to go after those debts under the Rating Act for whatever reason, then that would become doubtful. But the majority, we have powers under the Act to claim those, and the same with water debts. So then it's around building consents, resource consents, pension housing, those sort of things is where the doubtful debts could come into play. Yeah.
Thank you, Brendan.
Tanya, did you have something you wanted to add?
Through you, Madam Chair, this is a question as well, because I'm just not sure. Do we report these to council through our financial reports?
Not directly, no.
Should we be? Should we be producing like a summary of or is that level of detail that, I just remember making a case for extra resource at Westland District Council when we had a lot of outstanding debt, and we got extra resource in the finance area to help us kind of work on reducing that. But I don't know, Bruce might know what's kind of what's good practice out there in the world.
We are upgrading the way we're reporting, and that started with the discussion this morning about risks in the way Graham's come to us with this web program, which is really encouraging. That it would be normal for the risk committee to have a report on the aged debtors, both rates debtors and sundry debtors. And that's simply because cash is king, and if it's not in the bank, we can't use it. So it's helpful. But the other thing to reflect is that actually, as you have quite rightly pointed out, Brendan, amazing powers under the Rating Powers Act to collect. We should use those carefully. And indeed, it's helpful for elected members to be aware of the actions we are taking, particularly around older debts, particularly as in some cases you might even get into a forced sale or the likes, which has its implications. So it would be normal, and thinking about your work plan, sorry, Graham, we're making it even bigger, but that would be normal to have that on board. Perhaps one thing just to reflect for me, you talked about resources, Tanya. Are we collecting our own debts, or do we make use of somebody else, Brendan?
So in the initial instance, we have internal staff that chase up initially. Once they get to a certain point, then we use external debt collectors.
Yeah. Are you able to tell me who they are?
RML, I think. Receivables Management Limited.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I mean, there are a number of options around for that, and which don't need to go into now, but there are some various options. But again, Tanya, that would be just useful for us to periodically review that we're doing this the right way, which would include how are we going about enforcing the debts.
I think just to summarise there, we've actually made some real progress in terms of collecting some long-standing debts, sizable amounts of money. So I mean, it's whether the committee want to go down to that individual debtor level, or whether you just want a summary, of where we're at. I mean, it's like we're in an environment there with post-COVID, with there's certainly some areas there that we probably need to focus on as well. But we certainly can do it at a high level. I think just the listing individual debtors is going to probably do.
No, we definitely don't
Yeah.
need that through you, Madam Chair, but I think that it's actually a good news story.
Yeah.
You know, if you looked at the trends, you know, even if you mapped it out to a year, 18 months ago, the trend would probably look quite good since we've put a bit of focus and resource in that area. And at a summary level.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. The only issue there would possibly be privacy issues. You wouldn't be able to
You
name
wouldn't be able
names.
to tell.
No.
No, we wouldn't name.
So what you're saying is that you do it by category,
Total.
perhaps. Yep. Okay. No, that's cool. Yep.
Okay, so if we note in the minutes that there's another addition to the program, do I have someone that will, our recommendation is that the Risk and Assurance Committee receive the outstanding management letter points 2020-21 annual report from Brendan O'Callaghan, Finance Manager. Do I have someone that will move that?
Sorry, just before, could I just make one more question? And it's in relation to, sorry, where is it? It's under the heading of sensitive expenditure. And under the heading, the subheading progress, the last paragraph talks about the manager governance has some processes that she's wanting to discuss with elected members, expense claims, blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying that that should be done today, but I'd be interested to know what those are at some stage. Yep. So can we get is it appropriate to deal with that now, or would you rather leave it till another time?
Sorry, I have some ideas that I've briefly talked to Tanya about, but I haven't had a full discussion, so I don't think it's appropriate, but we could certainly add that to June.
Be fine. Thank you.
I wonder if I could just jump in too, please. I appreciate you wanting to move on to the motion, Annette, but I do have a couple of questions. Is it okay to ask those?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Brendan, I did. So firstly, can I just say, Brendan and Graham, thank you for a much better report. This is superb. I sense control and commitment on both your part, which is a great response. So thank you for that. And knowing that our auditors in front of us, I would just like to acknowledge the work that you guys have put into this report, which gives me a great deal of comfort that you're actually onto the matters and treating them seriously, which is superb. And so just my deep appreciation that you're doing that. But of course, I've got some questions, Brendan.
Of course.
It's sort of like a yes, but.
Apologies, Bruce. I had heard your voice in the conversation. I was thinking that you'd already had your contribution, but I forgot to ask you.
No, that's no worries. I'm a bit older. I'll get my voice in there, I suppose. Brendan, look, I am interested in actually how we get to dealing appropriately with those exception reports. I mean, the master file changes are a basic, as you're well aware. And indeed, I recognise that we have got smallness of numbers on our side. Therefore, the extent of segregation of duties is minimal. And I think you've indicated that you want to deal with access rights first before you come back and deal with this. Can I just take it though, even though there is, as you've identified, a level of segregation risk with you, risk probably being the wrong word, but in essence, given your rights, are we at least still doing a review monthly or as relevant on those changes to the master file done by a separate person, and indeed you having the overview of that?
Yes, so I get sent automatically by the system every first of the month, those exception reports, and I go through and review them within 5 days or so of that. And then if there is a situation, ticket suppliers or something else where I've made a change, because the report lists which user made the changes as well. So
right.
While I review them, if I've made a change, I'll also then get Graham to review my changes just to get a double check.
Brilliant. I knew you would be doing the obvious, but actually the key thing there was that the system reports who makes the change. which I think would make that really important then for enabling Graham to, dare I say it, check you. And actually to reflect here, Annie, that's actually protection for Brendan rather than a check because we doubt him. I want to be very clear on that. So it's good that that's in play. So I appreciate that, mate.
Yep.
There are a couple of other matters there, which I think we will get through. Kai, I think it was you that spoke. I noticed the point about sensitive expenditure. My eyes were drawn to that as well. Kit, look, there's a bit of an emphasis from the Auditor General at the moment around, so I should be careful how I should put that, it sounds like it's a fad. There's a necessary emphasis from the Auditor General around fraud, bribery and corruption, which includes things like how we deal with sensitive expenditure. So in a way that you've talked about, Kit, I think it would be good to give this the priority that we can. My experience elsewhere, this is rarely a problem, but it's one of those things that's just good to know the controls are in place and they're battened down. So I would be keen to see that is followed through on, and
I guess
I appreciate that.
Yep. Just to talk to that, I had a talk to Graham yesterday because I had thought about it on the drive to work. We have had a lot of change in staff recently, so my plan in the next few weeks was to actually resend to all the staff, and it might include elected members in this as well, the sensitive expenditure policies that were adopted middle of last year, I think it was.
Yes,
just as a reminder for the existing staff and obviously for those new staff so they're aware of them, even though they've probably been made aware of where they are stored. And so send that out just as a reminder as well. There's something else that I'm going to do.
Brilliant, mate. Oh, look, thank you for that. And thank you for that. As I said, my opening comment was thank you very much for the upgraded response. And I do appreciate the effort you and Graham have put in. So thank you. Thanks, Annie.
Thanks, Bruce. So no further comments. We'll go back to the motion on the outstanding management letter points. Did I have a mover in a second for that? Your Worship, and Councillor Jeffries, thank you. All in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. Now, do we have Billy online? So we'll go back to the Key Information Services Risks and Current Strategic Improvements report.
Good afternoon, everybody. I presume everybody can hear me okay?
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Billy.
Cheers, thank you. Yes, good afternoon, and thanks for the opportunity to discuss this paper. Just a little warning before I start. About 10 minutes ago, my internet stopped working, so fingers crossed that I can get through this without further interruption. Just up front, I want to say that I guess this report comes with something of a disclaimer in the sense that it shouldn't be construed as full and final of all the risks that there might be within the organisation relating to IT. But these are the, I guess, in some ways, the low-hanging fruit from my point of view. As I've said in the executive summary, the current focus is to provide a more reliable backup and server environment. In both cases, they are very much at the end of their lives, and the DR site, as you may have seen later in the report, has been quoted as being hanging on by a thread. I'll discuss those more in a second. The other topics that I think are most pressing are to get more cybersecurity controls in place, and also to implement some sort of IS auditing and asset management system. But if I just talk about the DR facilities and backup first, if I could sort of jump ahead slightly. The DR facility, most of the equipment in that facility, which is hosted in Hamilton, was close to 10 years old. And there had already been some hardware failures there, which diminished its capability. And I suspect, just looking at it and seeing what was there, had we actually been in a DR situation where we were reliant on that equipment, I think we would have failed badly. On top of that, the backup solution that we were using, there's nothing wrong with the application per se, but we were backing up to a local drive in Ōtorohanga, and that was not really fit for purpose. So we started to look at that as the first part of a change to the environment, and with some discussions with NFX, which are the contractors that supply technical support to us, we decided that they would essentially put a backup facility in the cloud, and that we would use that as our first line as a DR facility. And that may not be ideal in many respects, but I feel it's good enough now while we conclude the remainder of the infrastructure changes. And at some point in the future, I'd like to swing back and have a look at that again, but that will at least get us to a point where we've got a kind of a stable backup / DR foundation. If I swing now to the server hardware, again, what we've got in the building in Ōtorohanga is okay. It's about 3 years old, so technically it's got a few years life left in it. But of course, there's a decision about what to do about that. If we decided to replace that hardware for something a little bit more robust and a little bit newer and a little bit faster, it kind of sets our path to stay out of the cloud for at least another 5 years. And I think that is a little bit short-sighted of us. So again, we've asked NFX to look at migrating that infrastructure into the cloud. And there isn't really a lot left in our server room. And the intention is for them to set up an environment in Microsoft Azure and to migrate the last of the servers across there sort of on a one at a time, basically, to ensure that we don't cause any grief to our users and to ensure that performance is maintained during that process. Now, all of that work is now underway. The backup solution is certainly in place. The old DR facility hasn't yet been decommissioned, but will be shortly. And they are now looking at the environment for us in Azure. Going down to network connections and redundancy, in an ideal world, I would love to have 2 fibers coming into our building from 2 directions and supplied by 2 separate vendors. But I'm sorry to say that in Ōtorohanga that might be somewhat difficult. However, having said that, we'll do our best to ensure that there is some redundancy in that feed. I mentioned that cybersecurity is also a major priority. And there is some work going on to restructure the network. As a consequence of the cloud environment, we will be getting 2 new firewalls. And we are also looking at implementing a zero trust network. And to put it in very, very simple terms, there has to be 2 things available for that to work: a known device and a known person. So you can't log on to a device that you've never used before or that doesn't belong to the council. There needs to be a review of our current tools and processes. And I've suggested that the easiest way forward on that might be to hire a consultant to undertake that work. And as it happens, one of the vendors that we work with very closely has recently started a service for that, specifically for local government. And it's basically a case of agreeing to a certain number of hours per month for that work to be undertaken. And they would be our kind of contracted security advisor in that space. On top of that, I've also suggested that we look at a managed service to provide monitoring, alerting, and to some degree a response to any attempts to circumvent our network. Again, that's not something that a council of our size can afford because they tend to be very, very expensive services. But I'm pleased to say just in the last week or so, that same vendor I was talking about before has actually put forward, again, a local government solution to that, and I'd certainly like to give it more consideration. I think there's also a good argument that we should provide ongoing training for our users on cybersecurity. I doubt whether you could go to a cybersecurity conference without somebody saying that the users are the weakest link, and that's not to say that they are, I'm trying to find a politically correct phrase, shall we say, less capable than I might be. And to be fair, I've been fooled by these things in the past too, and I never take never hold anybody responsible when things do go wrong with the likes of spam, but it needs to be kept in their minds. And also because changes are constantly occurring, and you know, the easiest way into a network is actually to convince somebody to let you in. So I think, as again, I'd like to focus on that a little bit more, but that's probably after some of these other changes have been implemented. I mentioned also at the beginning that we really need to have a good asset management and auditing tool. We have some sort of rudimentary tools for that space, but we really don't have an overarching piece of software that can give us a good, clean overview of the hardware, the software, and the activity that's occurring on the network, which would give us a lot better understanding and vastly improved control over those devices and what they may or may not be doing. Going into the smaller stuff, Office 365, when I first started, I was greatly confused by the licensing of Office because I was told we were licensed for Microsoft Office 365. But the reality is we were actually using a much older version, Office 2016. And that work to bring Office versions up to date has already started. It's not something we're attempting to do in one fell swoop, but between my staff and NFX, they are upgrading people as required. And that's basically to bring everybody up to the same version of Office 365. As I stated in there, the licensing has also been updated. There is a bit of an issue with the onboarding and exiting of staff. We did a bit of for another piece of work, we actually did a bit of an audit of our current users and found, off the top of my head, I think it was about 8 that had left some time ago and who still had active accounts. Obviously, that is a considerable risk. So that is a process that needs to be improved. Email archive, I was a little bit surprised to discover that there wasn't one. And I guess there is an argument about this, but I do feel that in order to meet some of the requirements of the Public Records Act, we should have one. The unfortunate thing is, of course, they're not terribly good until you've had them for you know, quite some period of time. But now is probably the best time to start. And further on, standardization of hardware and centralization of purchasing. We've already implemented the centralization, and now that we have, I hope, a better handle on the things that are being purchased, I'd certainly expect the hardware that we buy to be standardized more. And that's just to provide some consistency, but also so that support is improved, and so that we, again, only have to protect one style of device as opposed to many. And the last item there, workstation security, as I've noted, technically any staff member can download and install any software they wish. Again, it's a huge risk, and we're starting to tidy that up already. The other thing that I haven't mentioned there is that I'd also like to bring in multi-factor authentication, which is a bit spotty in its use, and I think needs to be brought in sort of universally across the organisation. So those are the things that I've had identified sort of up to the beginning of March, and which I regarded as of some importance. As I sort of indicated at the beginning, I've no doubt that there are others, but yeah, I'm sure, well, I certainly hope there's another opportunity to bring you up to date with those in the future. So if anybody's got any questions, I'd be more than happy to try and answer them.
Thank you for that, Billy. Really good for the committee to see a warts and all report, and see some highs and lows in our CE's face and what she's good to see you're making her a priority for the Microsoft rollout. And I'm really pleased to hear that your gold standard is 2 fibres. Yeah, a pity that we can't make that the priority, but at least our disaster recovery has improved anyway.
It's a start.
Any comments from the floor, please? Your worship.
Yeah, just quickly, Billy, no questions or anything, just blown away by the revelations of how shoddy the system is, and really glad to have you on board and actually finding the problems and hopefully addressing them. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate the comments. Look, to be fair, I would never regard them as shoddy. I wouldn't want to give you that impression.
Billy,
Through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Billy, congratulations. Yes, I think it's an excellent report, and it's really good to have you on board. So, so well done. I've got a couple of quick questions. I'm not too sure whether you'll be able to answer these today, but would it be fair to say that the disaster recovery and backup solution, would that be your #1 priority?
Yeah, well, it's folded together with the server move to the cloud, but yes.
Okay. And did you have a time frame for that?
The disaster recovery and backup is largely finished now, actually. There is some tidying up to do, but I think we can regard the backups, which I guess is really the most important part of that, is done. Excellent. Oh, that's good news. Thank you. I'm just going back to, it's only a small thing, but in bullet point number 9, the last sentence that starts, the stepped migration is to ensure that, should that word be exiting or existing? Oh, sorry, yes. Oh, at least I didn't put exciting. Well, you got me excited. It should be existing, my bad, sorry. That's fine, I thought that, yeah, good. And going back to number 8, you talk about the costs and the risks associated with the use of the cloud. I'm not sure whether you're able to answer all that today, but are we able to get some information on what those costs are and what those identified risks are? I think probably we need to know that. Yeah, look, I'll just give you these are off the top of my head costs, but if I recall correctly, once the entire environment is in the cloud, I think it was going to cost us about $2,500 per month, but that was only an estimate because without telling too many secrets, the way the cloud stuff is charged, it can be very difficult to figure out what the final cost will be anyway. Plus they have extra charges for data coming back this way, back to us. So the gut feel was about $2,500 a month. Some of the risks, it can be very difficult to exit the cloud once you're in there. If you decide we're going to put all of our data back in a server in our server room, it can be very difficult to get it back or to migrate to another provider, for instance. And some of the other, I guess they're not really risks, but things that need to be considered is the fact that in order to properly maintain those costs, you actually have to put some effort into making sure that things like storage and CPU usage aren't exceeded or blown out. If Brendan was going to stay in the office all night, for instance, and play some of his favourite first-person attack games, we would have to have a serious discussion with him because the costs would blow out. Right. But I can provide certainly more details through Graham if you like, and do some more
Yeah, no, that's cool. And the last one was item 17. I just wondered, are you able to give us some info on, you say here there are several managed services available that provide monitoring and so on.
Yeah,
Who are they and where are they and at what cost?
Well, I was just talking to Graham about them yesterday, and I don't want you to be frightened by this, but we actually, at the regional council, we looked at one which is considered probably the world's sort of gold standard, company called CrowdStrike. And we liked the idea that they had already started work at Hamilton City Council, and we thought, well, if we could partner with them, that'd be great. Well, the cost to the regional council, and bear in mind it's about 2/3 the size of Hamilton City Council, was going to be $600,000 per annum. And that's an awful lot of money to pay for, shall we say, risk aversion. But the other ones that we're looking at, and I accept that they're probably never going to be as good as that CrowdStrike one, but they certainly go a long way to it. They are in the sort of priced at about the $25,000 to $30,000 per annum. And the alternative is to hire somebody to do that work for you, but that's going to cost conservatively $100,000 to $120,000 for a good cybersecurity expert on board.
Okay, well, thank you for those comments, Billy. And I can assure you that we won't be looking at the $600,000 option.
Thank you. It would be hard to stand up in front of you all and justify that, I've got to be frank.
And probably hard for Kit to get his hands out of his pockets as well. Bruce, your comments.
Thank you. Just to remind you, folk on the Hamilton City Audit Risk Committee, by the way. So,
ouch! I take back those remarks in that case.
Look, Billy, you've good reputation procedure, and this report is really helpful. And Kit, you and I are probably pretty close. I suppose we're accountants, so we ask money questions. What I would like to perhaps just know from this is, you've been careful in describing that, we've got some effectiveness, but I still suspect you are characterising here something which is at the lower end of the maturity scale. And I think we just have to accept that, and I wouldn't want you to necessarily disabuse it because I can't see this as being anywhere else but there. But hey, first time I've seen, and I think this is tremendous, this sort of cut of actually where we sit. It says actually, and you clearly have development in your mind. So I'm going to ask that sort of governance-y question. Do you have a strategy? Do you have a roadmap in mind that is governing the investment into this? Because, of course, my final question would be, and what is the investment price?
No, I think...
It's so cruel, Bruce. He's been here like 1 month.
Well, look, can I let me put it the other way, Billy? But I mean, I think, Tanya, this is, perhaps I should speak to you actually rather than Billy, because Billy's doing the hard yards. But, and there's nothing here that I sense, by the way, is poor investment. When we're at a relatively, lower maturity level, I mean, most investment is almost a no-brainer. But I would like to know where we are going. And the strategy says we have some form of goal. I won't say endpoint, because you can never, for instance, have an endpoint with security. Like to know, do we or will we develop a strategy and be thinking about what are the component and constituent parts of that for this? Because I think that would be valuable. And I think given its importance, I hate to say it, Graham, but you can see your work plans growing. This is the sort of thing that actually the risk committee could have a valuable role for the council in just ensuring the program that goes with that strategy is being maintained.
Billy, do you want me to kick off, or would you like to
I'm like,
So
oh,
please.
sorry.
Through you, Madam Chair. So, like I do with most staff that start with our organisation, I tend to have a catch up after they've been in their roles for kind of a month to 6 weeks. And Billy and I went for and had a meeting a few weeks ago. And yes, we've not only talked about what is a lot of what's in this report, but we did talk about strategy as well. And Graham and I do when we catch up too. So I think what I've heard and what I totally support is around securing our platform at the moment, and we're, the things that are really important and also placing us at some risk. And this report reflects that. And then I think there's a springboard from that into mapping out what does the next kind of 12 months, 2 years, that sort of thing look like. So yes, very much in the thinking, but really supportive of Billy and the team and Graham getting us into a space where we're not losing sleep over, cyber risks in our servers and things like that. So that's my starter. Graham or Billy might want to add to that.
Perhaps I'll start by saying I couldn't have said it better.
Look, I'm oh, sorry, Graham, is there anything you want to add?
I couldn't have said it better either.
Well, and I will just do my governance bit then, Graham, and just say, look, I want to encourage you to do that, because I do, there will ultimately be a point where we need to have, as governors, the ability to have a higher level grip on where this strategy is going, because it's critical to the external threats to our organisation. It's critical to our ongoing running as we rely on and have IT as our solution, Tanya. So perhaps this is something we just need to keep on our bring up list in the broader sense of our discussions with Tanya as a committee as to where this is going, because I think somewhere I'll be really encouraging management to think through. There needs to be a bit of a peg in the ground, call it a strategy, call it a roadmap, whatever you like, which is going to sort of start to characterise the journey that this is brilliant, but where we're going to. Thanks, Andy.
I think, Bruce, I think as sort of Tanya inferred, there's a certain point we need to reach where we are, I hesitate to say meeting the minimum requirements, but it's sort of like there's a line in the sand that I can't really define, where we have a stable and secure and well-maintained environment. And I guess my focus has been to get to that point first, and then to start thinking about, well, okay, now what do we do to maintain and improve that in the future?
Well, I mean, I would encourage us, one way to sort of baseline your feeling would be, for instance, to make use of the SAM assessment, so that we start to do a wee bit of benchmarking against something that is an external. It's a self-assessment, but we can start to benchmark ourselves against something that's got some external validity, which helps us. That would be a good launch pad to then develop the strategy. So I think all I'm wanting to do here, while I sound like, and I am giving you more work ultimately, Billy, is to reflect that the committee has you've struck a real chord here and has a strong interest and should have a strong interest. So we're keen to be supportive of the really good work that you've clearly kicked into here for us, and actually how we take that forward. So thank you, appreciate it. We'll maintain a very keen eye on this.
Excellent, that's all I wanted. Oversight.
Yeah, big brother, that's right. Thank you. Thanks,
Tanya,
Andy.
you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, just to sing Billy's praises a bit more, aside from his lovely personality, another reason why we chose him for the role is because he's actually the president of Algum, if anyone didn't know that. So yeah, I think in terms of being well connected, understanding industry and industry benchmarks, and being able to sort of put feelers out around best practice, we've got the right man in the role.
Great.
Now he's all bright red and
I
embarrassed.
am. I told you how I felt about public praise.
I know.
Tremendous.
Well, thank you all for your kind comments. It's been greatly appreciated.
Thank you for that. And yeah, since we've all been so happy to see this report, I imagine that on the big question, if we were to say what was keeping you awake at night, I presume you are getting some sleep now.
Oh, the only thing that's been keeping me awake at night is the move to your district, which we have now completed. And so I've actually had about three nights of good sleep over the last week. So I'm quite pleased about that.
Good to know our systems aren't keeping you awake.
No.
So there being no further comment, the recommendation is that the Risk and Assurance Committee receive the Key Information Services Risks and Current Strategic Improvements report from Billy Nichols, Manager Information Services. Do I have a mover and a seconder?
Moved, yeah.
please? Moved, Kit.
Yes, second.
Seconded, Your Worship. All in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. And now, would you like to make an introduction, Brendan, or shall we move straight to our auditors?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chairperson. So on the line on the Zoom, we have Lucy and Matt. So Matt's the new partner on our audit. As you'll be aware from last year, Melissa, who was the partner, she's left at the end of November last year. Lucy's carrying over from previous years, so we've got that consistency in the manager, but yeah, Matt's the new partner. So I'll hand over to them to present their plan and engagement letter and introduce themselves and all that.
Thank you very much, Brendan, and good to be in front of you all. Just by way of introduction, I'm Matt Lang and will be the new audit partner, as Brendan mentioned. I have about 20 years of experience, all with Deloitte. I started off in Zimbabwe and then moved across to New Zealand about 13 or 14 years ago, and have principally worked, I've worked in local government across my time in New Zealand, so I have a fair bit of experience in the sector, and I've worked with Bruce before on Waitomo District Council, so and I hope to get out there in person sooner and meet everyone too, but appreciate your time today. And I'll in terms of what we've got to work through on the agenda, first up is the engagement letter. The engagement letter is consistent with prior year and the fees are in line with the audit proposal that's already been signed off. And there's largely no change there. I might step through the audit plan if that's all right, if there's no questions on the engagement letter.
Sorry, Matt, Bruce here, Bruce Robertson. Look, just I've forgotten all my professional ins and outs. Why do we have an engagement letter in this year? Do we sign one every year?
Yeah, Bruce, we do tend to present an engagement letter every year. So the option is there. We could do a 3-yearly one, or we could present one every year, and we prefer just to do it every year.
Brilliant. I mean, look, I've got no trouble. I've read through it and agree that it's standard, if I can call it that. And I'm certainly comfortable that it's signed. I'm probably more used to the 3-year engagement letter, but that's not a problem. I'm not. There's no critique there, Matt. I was just trying to understand, so that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. So in terms of the audit plan, and I will take it as read, but I will step through some of the more material items, and Lucy will lead through some of the other aspects of the audit plan. But just stepping through to the executive summary, I just wanted to pull out a couple of key aspects from the executive summary. The first one is materiality, and materiality will be set on a consistent basis with the previous year, and that expenditure will be our key benchmark. Materiality at this interim stage looks like it would be 618,000, and as part of that, the committee should consider whether they have any views on that materiality, and we're happy to take any questions on that materiality aspect. The second part, just to pull out on the executive summary, is independence, and there's a minor matter related to independence, and it's more of us just making sure you're aware of a potential conflict of interest. There is nothing there that we believe is of concern. We've discussed it with the Office of the Auditor General, and they've cleared it, but we did want to bring it to your attention, and we'll pull out the details a little bit later on in our audit plan. So just moving on to the areas of focus, and that would be the first area of focus is the fair value of infrastructure assets. And there's already been some discussion today around this, but the fair value of infrastructure assets, or councils are asset intensive, and a number of these assets are carried at fair value. And with fair value, there are a number of estimates and judgments that come with that. And what we're seeing in the current market environment is there's obviously considerable cost pressures that are coming through. And as a consequence of those cost pressures, and particularly how we go about valuing a number of these infrastructure assets, it is anticipated that there's likely to be a more material movement in either the indicative fair value, or if a valuation is performed, in the ultimate valuation. So we have, across the sector, there is indications that a lot more valuations might be required to be performed as a consequence of indicative movements in fair value. So the desktop assessments that are being performed at the moment are indicating a considerable movement in fair value, and that triggers the need to perform a comprehensive valuation. In terms of the timeline, look, it is, we're still a few months away from year end, but it'll be one of those things that will have a material impact on the financial statements. And there's certainly a reasonable amount of work if there is a need for a valuation to be performed. So Brendan's already kicked into that work stream. We would just encourage, if there is any close calls, or you do believe that there's aspects of it that the committee should be aware of. And I appreciate your next meeting would be in June, but it might be a useful consideration as to whether there's any close calls, if that's circulated outside of a formal meeting, just for the committee's input in terms of whether there should be whether the fair value desktop assessment in terms of the indicative fair value movement indicators there's no valuation required, or alternatively it triggers the need for a valuation, because a lot of councils are seeing, I've heard stories where the cost of pipes potentially have doubled in terms of what's coming through on valuation. So it could be a significant movement in the accounts. Then just moving on.
End, Matt, so we're all nodding at that at this end.
Okay, thank you. Just the next area is the management override controls, and this is a standard focus area for us that we will include. And nothing of concern that we need to pull out there, but acknowledging we will have a focus on that, and we have a significant risk around that as a consequence of the requirements of the auditing standard. We'll perform the typical work that we are required to do. I wouldn't say the typical work. We will perform all the necessary work we're required to complete in the audit process, and that will involve a review of journals, and specific journals with aspects or criteria that we believe warrant further investigation, a retrospective review of significant accounting estimates and judgments, and also a consideration of any unusual business transactions that have occurred in the business during the course of the year. And we'll report back to the committee on any areas that come through from that. The next area of focus is revenue recognition. And there's two aspects to our focus on revenue recognition. One is the auditing standards. There is a presumed risk of fraud across revenue. And based on the nature of the council's operations, we will rebut that significant risk of fraud. And that's consistent largely with the approach that's taken across a number of local government entities as a result of the nature of the revenue stream, and certainly consistent with the approach we adopt in previous years. But just acknowledging that there is that presumed risk of fraud and revenue. The second aspect to revenue is rates and the striking of rates. And I no doubt the committee would be well aware there have been issues historically where councils haven't got that correct, and that has resulted in a number of complications and issues that have had to be worked through. So as a result of that, we will do a focus work stream to consider how rates have been struck and ensuring all the considerations relating to the legal aspects of it have been appropriately considered, acknowledging with the caveat that we are not legal experts, but we will step through that in detail to consider the process that have been worked through to striking of the rates. The last point I will talk to is areas of focus, and in the area of focus, there's a range of different work streams that are being worked through at a national level, but the key one for this year will likely to be the focus on three waters and what that means for local government and how that evolves. In terms of what that would mean, it would likely mean from our perspective, we would keep abreast of those changes and make sure we're working alongside council to consider any audit aspects or accounting considerations that may come out of that as it evolves. At this point in time, there is a view across the sector that there will be an emphasis of matter included in the audit report as a consequence of the significance of three waters to all local government entities, and drawing the user's attention to that matter through including that emphasis of matter. And as part of that, also just acknowledging, circling back to the fair value of infrastructure assets, would encourage consideration is also given to the three water reform in the context of that valuation of three waters, because with the increased focus in this area in the coming financial year, users of financial statements would naturally be interested in that, what value those three water assets are carried at. I might just pause there, given the significance of the issues, and just see if there's any questions from the committee. Okay.
Can I, sorry,
John.
Matt, just Bruce here, Annette, is it okay if I jump in here?
Yes, and then followed by Councillor Jeffries.
Oh, right, thank you. Well, no, you go first, mate. I said to Annette I'll go last. I didn't hear anything, so you go first, mate.
Thank you, Bruce. Well, there's really one question to Matt, and the other one is probably more towards Graham and Brendan. But in terms of valuations, are you suggesting, Matt, that we're actually looking at a departure from our 3-yearly valuation cycle, because your report suggests that, or states that we're looking at roads and bridges and so on this year, but Three Waters is also in that 3-year review period as well. So, but because of the way in which you're suggesting that asset values have moved, are you saying then that we should be looking at all our assets, or are we going to stick to that 3-yearly cycle?
Thank you. In terms of what we are seeing across the sector, there certainly are indications that there are material movements in the underlying costs of assets. And so, while not mandating or anyway saying there is a need for evaluation, that fair value exercise does need to be undertaken with a fair degree of rigour to ensure that there has not been a material movement in the desktop assessment. And if that is undertaken and the committee considers it, management duly considers and concludes that there is not a material movement in the fair value of the assets, there is not a need to do a full valuation. But if there is a material movement, you will be required to do a complete valuation. The comment in terms of the three waters is really, if there's a degree of judgment that you are looking to in terms of whether you do or you don't, with these decisions, there will likely be a degree of greyness around that, but just acknowledging that if you're sitting on a line, that might, and whether you do evaluation or not, and there could be a bit of a judgment there, you might decide, given the focus in that area, you would proceed with a full valuation, but certainly not saying there needs to be a full valuation.
Okay, no, thanks for clarifying that. And the other question was really to Graham and to Brendan. Are you comfortable that we're up to date with what's needed in terms of the preparation of the service performance statements?
Do you want me to answer that? So through you, Madam Chair. So I know that Nadia and Ross have been working on that particular part of the annual plan. I think an email has gone out to managers, and we're following up with data around performance measures and that. So that process is well underway.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And to be fair, Councillor Jeffries, we did do a big body of work on that with Ross in the LTP work. So we're expecting a much different looking report this time
Except
round.
that 30th of June is D-Day, isn't it?
And also acknowledging your comments earlier, Brendan, on getting started next week because of what the outcomes of the fair value. Do you have any more comment to make on Kit's question?
No, I don't think so. Matt pretty much covered it off.
Thank you.
And in terms of workload valuers, they may not be able to do it straight away. So I mean, we obviously need to get that moving pretty quick and to be talking to Deloitte too in terms of timeframes.
Oh, look, great news to hear that, Graham. And actually, you raise a very good point that if we did have to revalue, we might have and had to use external resources. We could be struggling to find a valuer. So it does make sense that we rock through this as soon as we can. Thank you. Appreciate the advice. Thanks, Annette, by the way. That's my question.
Thank you. So back to you, Matt or Lucy.
Thank you. I'll just hand over to Lucy and she'll take you through the rest of the report. And just the first item would be COVID-19. And here's hoping it's one of the last times we might have to see COVID-19 in a report.
Thank you, Matt. So just following on, so impact of coronavirus on the audit. So again, we'll consider any impacts this might have and operational wise. However, council has been able to operate throughout the period with no impacts from lockdowns or having to stop operations, which is good. Just again, highlighting if of interest, severance payments, related parties and compliance with laws and regulations. Our next section is around the statement of service performance. So as Kit mentioned or asked the question around, has this been started to look at? That's really good to hear from the council and from the management team. Good to following on from the LTP, which we got through last year. A lot of work has been done on this, and it will be really good to see the outcome and what the new report will look like. But again, just a focus area on that, and also referencing to in section 4 later on with the new standard that's coming in. This is the comparative year, so it is something that the council needs to keep on the radar and start thinking about what that reporting might end up looking like. So that's our focus areas. So then on to looking at our communication and our reporting with the committee and also the council. So it's a brief or high level timeline that we have, which kind of shows our interim visits, final, and when we're looking to sign off before the statutory deadline. And as always, we'll continue our communication and feedback with management and the committee as necessary, and hope that you guys can also reach out to us if need be. Our team, you've got Matt and I who are running it from our side, and we've also got a number of staff who have got experience within the council and with OAG as well that will be supporting us in completing the audit work. Other reporting matters, so section 3 of our report is talking about fraud responsibilities and representations. So this is just very similar to previous years, outlining what responsibilities of the council is in terms of these items, and also what our responsibilities as auditors are. At the end of the audit, we'll obtain the representation from council to cover off these items. Next, we talk about our independence and fees. So fees have been already set and agreed, and this is the last year of the proposal, the 3-year proposal, which was previously signed in 2020. And then section 4 is talking about other developments or financial reporting that we would like to highlight and bring attention to for the council to consider and keep on their radar, such as the PPE FRS 48, which is talking about the service performance reporting, and also sensitive expenditure, which we've covered, and climate related financial disclosures, which is a hot topic, and there's more regulations and disclosure requirements coming into play. Cool, thank you. So if there's any other questions from the committee.
Do you have any questions in the room? Councillor Jeffries.
Yeah, just a quick one on the development and the financial reporting. I'm always interested in the change in standards, but so I see the effective date for all of those other than the last one is January 2023. Are we across all of those changes?
In terms of, from our perspective, I don't think there would be a significant impact to the council. Lucy's mentioned the PBE FRS 48 service performance reporting standard that would need to be considered, but even then, given this the amount of work that goes into the statement of service performance reporting, I'm not expecting considerable change that would need to occur across local government entities.
Oh, that's good news. Thank you.
Bruce.
Yes, could I, thank you, Elliot. Matt, and actually Brendan or Graham, can I just check on the timing? So I didn't quite pick up, when do we have the plan to have the actual audit opinion available? Assuming we do our bit too, by the way, what date are we planning for, roughly? When it says October, is that pre or post the election to be on point?
So when I first emailed Lucy about this meeting and getting the plan done and stuff, I did say that we would like to get it done before the election. But obviously that will depend on how things go with the audit and timeframes and all that sort of stuff. And so I don't know what they've actually scheduled in their calendar specifically. Obviously we haven't talked about specific dates, but yeah, that was what we were hoping.
Yeah, it would give a sense of looking, and this is not me thumping the table or anything like this, Matt, but it does become relevant that actually this council goes out of existence on the 8th of October. And if we go into the new period post the 8th, which with needing to sign off an annual report, it's a new council that's doing it now. I'll acknowledge very quickly that I think all bar 3 that I know of won't be signed before the 8th, but I'm just interested if you can, if you and Lucy have planned or will be able to come back to us with a sense of reasonably exact timing.
Yep, sure, Bruce. So at the moment, in terms of planning, we are intending to aim to sign off by the end of September. That's what our planning has aligned. I would just note to the committee that we continue to face the challenges that we have in previous years around audit resourcing. So, but we are fully committed to it. Unfortunately, while the borders open up shortly, and we are getting resources into the country, there is a lag before we get people behind desks and working away. And so we face those continued constraints existing. But Bruce, we're fully committed and acknowledge the challenges it will create to try and sign off before that. And that's certainly what we plan for. Look, if it doesn't look like it's going to occur, what we will do is commit to make sure we keep you up to date of the progress. But there's no indications that it's not going to occur at this stage. So end of September is broadly where we've looked to sign off by.
Well, that's great news too, Matt. Look, and all I would ask as chair of the committee is, look, give us fair warning. It's great that we can anticipate pre the 8th. And I appreciated a couple of things. A, we've got to perform. B, some of those big issues, like if we suddenly have to revalue our assets, might all of a sudden have an impact which neither of us desire, but could be just realism in the world. And your resourcing could also impact. So totally accept that there are matters which could prevent that. So I'm encouraged by the communication today and probably what has already gone into getting us to this meeting. And I just encourage you to do that. But equally, if you really believe that that can't be met, it's better for that to be signalled early, because I would believe the committee in its September meeting would need to do something important and relative to passing what is in effect incomplete accounts and an audit over to a new council. So that's all I'd like, is as much warning as possible. We better to call it early if we have to, than not.
Thank you, Bruce, and noted.
Thank you. And thank you, Annette.
Thank you, everyone. And something to be said for good communication again everywhere. So it's being nothing further, then we have the recommendation that the Audit and Risk Committee, now there's a slight change here from the agenda. That we approve His Worship the Mayor to sign the engagement letter for the audit of the 2021-22 annual report, and B, receive the audit plan for the audit of the 2021-22 annual report as presented by Deloitte. Do I have a mover and seconder?
So moved.
So moved, Councillor Jeffries, second, Your Worship. All in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. So we propose now to take a 10-minute break. So Matt and Lucy, you're welcome to come back and join us for the balance of the meeting, but if you would like to retire from the meeting, you are also welcome to do that. And we will adjourn and meet back at, shall we say, what are we now, nearly 2:40, 10 to 3.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just looking at the agenda, we might sign off now if that's all good, but appreciate the committee's time and thank you.
Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
See you in the future.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
Is everyone ready? Okay, we'll recommence the meeting and welcome Tracy.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and select members. Hope you're all well.
Thank you.
Okay, so just as part of, I guess, your due diligence requirements, we're just provided a progress report update on where things are at as far as health, safety and wellbeing at council. So I guess highlighting, rather than go through the whole report, we've got a dashboard at the back that we could sort of have a look at the pretty pictures, but just highlighting some of the good stuff is that in October last year, council engaged or approved and filled an additional resource to help in the health and safety and wellbeing space. So we have a people and capability administrator that was hired to be sort of shared role across human resources and health, safety and wellbeing. So there's been a fair amount of my time has been spent doing some training for her, getting her up to speed with a lot of the administrative and compliance aspects of health and safety. She so far is doing a fantastic job, and there's been some big leaps forward in the space, so that's great. Another couple of highlights is just we've noticed a decrease in the number of near-miss reporting and site inspections, and I guess a contributing factor to that could be, will be, the lockdown that we had from October through to December. Certainly would have reduced exposure, but we still need to put a focus into those spaces to try and encourage ongoing and continued reporting of that stuff, because at the end of the day, that's our proactive space. It's where we get to identify some learnings, preventative actions, etc. And the site inspections are paramount in ensuring that not only our own staff are working safe out in the field, that our contractors are as well. But yeah, that's, I guess, the highlights. And then looking at the dashboard, we have a limited, I guess, array of statistics that we can share just based on the fact that, we're doing this through Excel spreadsheets. So it is based on staff remembering to fill in forms once they get back to the office, because it is all paper-based. So, but you can see there's a little bit of training done through the 6 months ending 21, with a fair amount that has occurred or is scheduled to occur in this first half of the year as well. And you can see the trends of the events that have been recorded by month and by the type of incident that has occurred, whether it's a near hit or an injury, etc. So I guess it's really the next six months is still completing training with the people and capability administrator to get her up to speed. I was there 1 day a week, and that I had to drop that down to 1 day a fortnight middle of last year, just due to my own work commitments, struggling to sort of keep up with everything. And the intent is that we'll get Tancha, the new people and capability administrator, she'll get up to speed and be able to take on a lot of that operational day-to-day stuff, meaning I won't need to be there as much other than for subject matter expert advice and guidance. And that's a very quick highlight.
Thank you, Tracy. Do you have a feel for, like, obviously the reporting has been impacted and perhaps processes. Do you have a feel for how the health and safety culture is? Has that changed?
I don't think it's changed. It would benefit from improving, but I don't think there's been a decline. I think it's not easy to remember, especially for operational staff, field staff out and about, remembering when they get back to the office or where their computer is, to actually get paperwork out and fill out a near miss or an incident. It's common across a lot of businesses, doesn't matter what sector they're in. If it's not easy for them, well then, yeah, they'll forget. If they can't do it on their phone, they'll forget. So I do encourage, have said to staff, feel free to send me a text if something happens and I can initiate it from there. But it's just, thinking about, acknowledging that it is a near miss. That's often the first barrier. So they don't think about it being a near miss. They're just like, oh, that was lucky, and carry on.
Thank you. Any comment from the floor, Your Worship?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions for my clarification, Tracy. Is a plaster on a finger classed as an injury? And secondly, what is an observation?
So plaster on a finger is an injury. And even if there's no treatment that's needed, not even first aid, it's deemed an injury. Sorry, what was your second question?
What is an observation?
That could be something where someone is, perhaps one of our engineer representatives have gone to a site to have a meeting with the contractors on the site, and they might observe that something is either unsafe or really good, a very positive observation, and they can record that. And we encourage the positive observations because it's always good to have the good news as well and acknowledge good work. But yeah, it's not something that, it's a big new to council, I guess, and it's there as a, well, it might not be a near miss or it might not be an incident, but we need to capture it. Could be a hazard.
Thank you.
Councillor Jeffries.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yes, the medical injuries, does that include any COVID related? Nothing?
No.
Okay, so these are just purely injuries as such.
That's right.
Yep. Okay. And are we able to know what you say there's been an increase? What sort of numbers are we talking about?
Oh, they're certainly not big numbers.
Right.
It's just looking out against the other years and the timing of the injuries, and they were, I guess, well, I won't say minor, but injuries on the lower end of the scale, so sprains and strains, things like that, pulled muscles. And one of them was with a more senior member of staff, so doing a physical job. So, yeah. The thing with injuries and near misses, the correlation between the two is if you don't get any near miss reporting or get a significant drop, there can be an increase in medical treatment injuries, and that could be because we've missed the opportunity of putting in preventative actions in the earlier stages. The two injuries that have occurred, probably not so relevant, but it can be.
Okay, thanks for that. And the only other question I had, Tracy, was the graph at the bottom of page 75, I think it is. I didn't quite follow that. Is that saying that if we have a look at that, the job satisfaction one, for example, is that saying that there was only one person responded to that? Is that what it's saying? Or
yeah, these graphs are provided from our EAP provider, Vitae, who have an on-site person that comes around and just engages with staff. In this case, it was one person that just had a little bit of a chat and expressed some, I guess, dissatisfaction. It was the same person that also talked about the workplace stress. So that was part of the report. It was said it was to be the same. It was the same person. So they're just obviously having a downtime or not so great time, and we don't get a lot of information because obviously it is confidential between the employee and Vitae. But yeah, it could be a 2-minute conversation or it could be a half-hour chat that they've had. We'll never know.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I just wondered, if that's the case, then it looks like there was only 5 people who responded to that. That'd be right.
It's through you, Madam Chair. So it's not a survey.
Yep.
It's a person from our provider, EAP, coming into our office.
Yep.
And of course, that's been a bit restricted over the last wee while with COVID and that, and having chats with staff. And so a staff member might, when this person, EAP person, says, "How are you?" a staff member might say, "Well, I'm having a real rough time actually. I'm feeling really stressed about my work." And so they jot that down. So they may only encounter 5 staff at the moment when they come into the building. So it's not a survey of the whole staff. What I was going to say is that we've been doing pulse surveys. So we do our annual staff survey, engagement survey, but we've also periodically been doing pulse surveys, and we've just done a coping with change survey. So this will be the 4th one that we've done around coping with change, around things like COVID and 3 water reform and the realignment and that. So we've just had our feedback back from that. It's just gone to the lead response rate to that.
Oh, excellent.
So 85%.
Is that a fair characterisation of your report?
Yeah, and I think not having someone easily accessible on site and encouraging or requiring certain processes to be carried out also has made it challenging. But now that we have this position that's 5 days a week, it's going to be easier, and she's process driven, so encouraging reporting and even being ears on the ground where they might hear something that's happened, being able to follow that up will be extremely beneficial, and it might just help. I think it'll help improve the reporting culture moving forward.
Is there any form of, I hear your point, if it's on a cell phone, mobile, people will enter it. Is there any easy, and dare I say it? And
it is something that I've briefly mentioned to Billy and was wanting to have a conversation with Tanya about that potential for moving forward, and even looking whether Ōtorohanga along with Waitomo have a shared system that they can share the costs. So yeah, it's definitely something that I'd really like to do, and I've seen it. I've just finished implementing one system with another private sector business, and their near-miss reporting has definitely increased significantly because it's so much easier and it's there on their phone.
Yeah. Well, look, I'd be interested to know ultimately how the general approach and culture does improve in the sense of we need to make some gains over time. And it's not just do we get reporting. Reporting is only is perhaps some evidence of an improving culture. I get that, but I'm very interested also from the sort of the strategic sense down. In other words, you've mentioned the due diligence obligations on officers, which of course a fair number are sitting around the table. Down. So I think that's a bit of a work on, because I don't necessarily get a strong sense of the health and safety strategy, but we'll get there eventually. I'm very keen though that some of these not making it easy is never easy, is it, in terms of trying to do it, but something that facilitates both ease of reporting, something facilitates enabling staff to be trained, something facilitates the regularity of the Health and Safety Committee, which all seem to be, from this report, a wee bit creaking for the good reasons of lockdown and blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. I'll be keen to see we monitor it. I mean, I'm not certain whether you have seen the rest of the meeting, but we have agreed that we need to have a regular health and safety report each quarter, and I would be keen that we focus on that. Thank you.
Yes. No, thank you very much for that, Bruce, because it is something that just in the last couple of weeks been having a few conversations with Tanya, but Tanch as well, where yes, quarterly reports coming through, and also me beefing up my my work in that strategic space and supporting ODC and setting some realistic and achievable objectives and goals in this health and safety space, and making sure we stay on track and achieve those and report on them.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Annette.
Thank you, Tracy. No further comments. So we have the recommendation that the Risk and Assurance Committee receive the Health, Safety and Wellbeing report from Tracy Stevenson and me, Health, Safety and Wellbeing Advisor. Do I have a mover and seconder? Councillor Jeffries, seconded His Worship. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy.
Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So next item is the annual refresh of top risks. Now, do we want to just take that as the recommendation that's been circulated, or do we want to, has anyone had any thoughts on it that they want to add to the minuted conversation? Bruce, do you have anything to add?
Oh, look, I was very encouraged, Annette, as I said, by this morning's meeting. I do appreciate people engaging, and I think we've got a positive way forward. So, look, from my perspective, unless folk, you're right, have thought over lunch that there's something else they want to raise, I'd suggest best we get down, work out those, you know, that discovery that the subcommittee's been set up to do, and we get on with it. So I'm happy to leave it at that.
Thank you. That was my thought. If we just note for the minute that a subcommittee has been arranged. So we've written there and not numbered in order to not give them their priority at present, but you will see that the top list are the ones that we are going to be looking at first. So that the Risk and Assurance Committee approved the top risks as follows: climate change response, cyber attack, organisational capability capacity, health, safety and wellbeing, financial loss, internal, program delivery, supply chain contractor availability, change in council direction, elections, inflation, costs, macroeconomic factors, consent renewal, no, consent should be renewal, requirements substantially increased, sector reform uncertainty, changes of government or change of government, hopefully another change, and business continuity. I seconder and mover and seconder. So moved, Councillor Jeffries, seconded His Worship. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Okay, that final item on the agenda, capital expenditure delivery risk exposure. I'll hand it to you, Mark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A bit closer. Over my work. Good afternoon. So in front of us today is the updated capital project delivery report, or capital expenditure delivery risk exposure, as it is named. So I'll take the report as read, but I will just touch on a few points in there that I think I could probably just elaborate on a little bit. And I think starting with the executive summary, I think I've probably put probably one of the most important points in paragraph 25, which maybe I should have put it in paragraph 1. And that's, I think, is to take the view of this capital works program as a 3-year program rather than looking at it as an isolated 1 year. So, and I think I just want to sort of say that mainly around the level of these capital projects is quite considerable, and to try and get them all achieved in the first year is a substantial feat. in itself. So, and that's probably come through, as you'll see, as we're currently sort of forecasting to only deliver about $7 million worth of that $10 million program. And a big, large chunk of that is relating around roading. And that's mainly because we are going to move two roading budgets into next year to carry out that portion of work in year 2. So although that probably doesn't sound good at the moment, that we're not going to deliver on the full value, I think if you keep that in mind, that 3-year program, it's not so doom and gloom. If I just go back to sort of like the risk assessment, and we actually sat through a Taituara branch meeting the other day talking about pressures on the market, and it was quite. I've sort of touched on it a little bit there, but I think there was a real one of the presentations, the reality of what's happening across the sector with the changes in material costs and the changes in procurement, and it's quite confronting when you see sort of numbers like 40% being thrown around. And I think that just highlights the challenges are definitely not isolated to Ōtorohanga district. This is a nationwide issue, if not a global issue at the moment. It's the pressures that are on raw materials. So that is quite a significant risk to us at the moment. And I've sort of highlighted in there that even just in the time it takes us to process from a tender award to negotiation to award, actually getting a contract signed, the prices are moving all the time. So we tend to chase our tail a little bit there sometimes, and being quite fluid in that process is really important. So that's and I'll just a few of those just to give you a bit more of a number around some of the lead times we're dealing with. It's anywhere between 4 and 8 weeks now with materials. 4 weeks you can sort of handle, but when you start hearing numbers like 8 weeks, that's 2 months, and that's a really hard thing to program. And we've even had to look at air freighting options to try and keep projects on time. So that comes with extra cost and just adds to the risk of delivery. So just going through a little bit more there, I've sort of touched on COVID, and interesting that Matt said hopefully this will be the last report with COVID in it. I don't know if he's correct there, but I think we're definitely in a different period of COVID, and although this I've sort of classed as a low to medium risk, it's definitely still a factor that it's probably very more common now. Everyone knows someone that's had it or got it, so it's still another factor to keep in our minds. As far as resourcing, you'll see that we're carrying about several vacancies at the moment in the roading team, and we hope to have that sorted out in the next couple of months. But one of the other things that's putting quite a strain on us is the Three Waters reform, and probably the pace that's moving with the establishment of the National Transition Unit currently, and the requests for information that are coming out. So we're doing some work in that space, but that is definitely an added stress or pressure to resource when you're trying to deliver your own capital works. So just going down through the project list, I won't go into everything in great depth. I'm sure there's plenty of questions coming. So the stimulus fund, we've completed 7 of the 8 projects. The 8th project is at considerable risk, actually, Howard, more risk since I wrote this report. So as far as 2 emails ago, but so yeah, we've got some issues to work through there, and I'll probably end up briefing you further on that later as the next few weeks progress, especially council. So but other than that, I think it's been a really good achievement to get at least 7 of those 8 over the line within what started out to be quite a stimulus fund. Ended up becoming quite a challenge, I'd say, for a lot of councils as we moved through lockdowns and COVID. So I still think getting 7 out of that 8 over the line has been a really good achievement. I've sort of touched on the roading budgets and how we're going to move a few budgets around there for these sort of consolidation projects next year. But I probably just wanted to highlight the drainage renewals. We've sort of underspent that 300,000 drainage renewals, and I just want to put probably a reason behind that, and it is we are waiting for some current stormwater modelling going on in the rural areas. So you'll all recall that we have looked at going one pipe size bigger on culverts as a rule of thumb, but the modelling is actually going to tell us whether that is the acceptable size, or we should be going 2-3 sizes bigger. So that fund, although we've underspent it this year, I'm sure we'll easily spend it next year. So just wanted to put a bit more around that. And into the water supply, you'll see that there's a couple of projects there that are probably contributing to the large underspend at this time, and the main one is the Huremu Taupaki water treatment consolidation. Now that's still in a feasibility sort of phase, and although we've done some internal design work, we're actually having a bit of trouble trying to get someone to review our work. So we're now on our fourth consultant, which has agreed to take it on and do some review or peer review of whether this consolidation will even work. So that project, we've had that money sitting in that long-term plan, but we still need to actually confirm whether this is even viable. So obviously that's why that was there unspent. And then the last one was that TRR. We haven't continued with that UV, although we are in regular discussions around that. I think part of that upgrade, there is other budget in year 2 and 3, is that we're in the process of upgrading the AVG filter, which until we had a really good handle on where that price might end, we didn't want to have all our eggs in one basket. So we've got a really good idea of that now, so it's sort of freed up that extra work. So I hope that makes sense. And of course, you'll see that we've had the asbestos overspend in Carpia, which we're still finalising that last cost, but that was our estimate. And the wastewater is probably in the opposite direction. We've had a slight overspend in there, and that's we're all aware of the Kakamutu sewer main failure we had back in July last year. So, and also that the extra cost for us to design those wastewater projects. The good news is we have evaluated the tenders for the Harry Hooker sewer main renewal, so we should have some good result on that next couple of days. So another project that will move from design into construction, so that's another relief. And yeah, community facilities, and that's probably another key one there. We've had some underspends in some of those large budgets, and I wouldn't like to think underspending is a bad thing. So yeah, and that's my conclusion. But I'll just quickly go to the graph, because I noticed this morning as I was reviewing this, and probably one of the most important numbers is missing, and that's in the project stage pie graph. I did have 36 projects written on there. So when you're looking at all those percentages, you're probably wondering what's that actually mean. So without that context, you don't know. So 6% is basically 2 projects. So although 6% sounds like a big number, it's basically only 2 projects. And a little thing for me to take away from today is probably use different blues, because there's a blue there that's very close. So yeah, I'm willing to take any questions and hopefully have some answers. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mark. Just as you're going through all these things, I presume have we got sort of across all the departments, like climate change flags? So where we're looking at that stormwater modelling, for example, I mean, that's a pretty obvious one that we'll be able to say, yes, we're taking into consideration. Yeah. Are we tracking that?
Yeah, I mean, that is a big thing, and that's why that modelling has been done, is because I mean, in the last 6 months there's been some incredible weather bombs that have hit New Zealand, and that's different. You know, that's something we're dealing with differently. I know that climate
change is something that we have to account. So rural stormwater modelling, they will take that into account. So yeah, in answer to your question, yes, I probably can't give you the broad scope of what that is right here at the moment, but it's definitely being considered.
And on the Kahoriko, does that, yeah, it's a all or nothing? Like, do we lose the 10 or just the bit that's allocated to Kahoriko?
So the deadline is very strict on the completion of this work, and I suppose the worst case scenario is we don't reach the deadline, as the money will be either, well, it won't be returned because we don't actually have it, it just won't come. So, which is quite a sad reality that we can't spend.
So the 10 won't come, or
Sorry, that's 2.5. Sorry, yeah. The 2.5 million is the stimulus fund. Is that what you're referring to?
oh yeah, sorry, yeah. So of the 10 projects, we won't get any of those,
No,
that funding.
no. So come 30th of June, anything that's complete is paid out. Of course, there's been ongoing payments, correct, Brendan? We're not carrying that burden. Yeah.
So the question was, do we not get the 2.5 million? Yes, we do, minus what we can't complete by the 30th of June is the message at this point.
And at this time,
And so
it's just Kahoriko at risk.
My advice would be that we do not proceed with Kahoriko until we've got an absolute definitive agreement from now the DIA that they will extend the deadline, because we can't do the project within the 30th of June deadline. So if they don't extend it, it's off. And if we can find some other projects to then channel that money in and still meet the deadline, the 30th of June, then we will. But if we can't, we lose that money.
Thanks, through Madam Chair. Thanks for that clarification, Tanya. Yeah, I'm just really surprised that they're so resolute on their decision here. Like, we see the procurement issues, we see the supply chain issues, we see COVID issues, and they are now, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm absolutely bewildered by it.
We might need some political help if things get really tricky.
Yeah, I think we all need political help. Yeah. No, I'm absolutely gobsmacked by their stance, to be honest.
Not just the DIA. Any other comments from the floor, Councillor?
It's just the one question, Mark, under the seal extensions, is the sealing of Short Street, is that in next financial year, is it?
No, that's to be done this year.
This year?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Oh, that's the only question.
Short Street.
Short Street.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bruce.
Oh, look, Mark, nice to meet you. I don't think we've physically shaken hands, if that's allowed in COVID times. I don't know. Look, thank you for the report. And look, I've found this really helpful. I must confess, I am uncertain whether I quite heard the answer. When I look at that CIP stimulus funding, you say we spent 1.8 million of the available budget. Is that across all of the 8 projects completed, or is that 1.8 on the Karako water plant upgrade? Is the 1.8 related to all the projects, or is it to the water plant upgrade? It's just slightly ambiguous.
Yep, I've probably confused everyone on this. So, yeah, so the available budget was 2.5 million, or the available funding. We've spent 1.8 of that 2.5. So the Ōtorohanga on all the other 7 projects.
Yes. Yeah.
The Ōtorohanga is just a little over 700.
Yeah. What's the chance of finding alternate projects if you have to?
Pardon?
Sorry, Bruce, what was the chance of?
What's the chance of finding alternate deliverable projects if you have to?
Well, we've got one straight off the bat, which we can put back into the Kakamuru sewer repair. And then it would be taking a look across the other cost centres and seeing what's available. I mean, it would be a lot easier just to deal with a balance of the remaining money, but to actually look at it in its entirety I think there's still the potential for us to do some work at Ōtorohanga that may not get to the complete project, but at least put some work in there. So I probably haven't given that a lot of thought yet, Bruce.
Yeah.
I'm hoping I don't have to have that process, but it will be. We've sort of asked for a decision before the end of the week because we don't want to wait too long before we have that decision made of which way we're going to go.
Look, and I get the idea of a 3-year, taking a 3-year view, Mark, about our capital program, and I think it's a smart idea. But that still means we've got, and I mean, I, by the way, agree that a dollar value is indicative. It's not always the most perfect or nuanced means of working out where we are with the capital program. But that means in effect 3 million is going to be picked up somewhere in the remaining 2. What's going to give us the confidence that we aren't just log jamming and putting into a new year a new problem?
Yeah, I think we've got to just accept the confidence of our staff to say they can deliver these, and I know that probably doesn't give you the level of confidence you're looking for, but they have taken on 2 reasonable sized projects for that roading, and I think those will absorb that in one financial year. So I think if we were dealing with a lot of smaller projects where lots of considerable delays, it might not be as comfortable with that, but yeah, I think given it's 2 projects, we should have a bit more confidence.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. It's a great report.
Tanya, do you want to comment?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. I think what is giving me a bit more confidence is the reporting we're doing to council as well, Bruce.
Yeah.
And it's a breakdown around what stage we're at of the project. So we're not just asking about when it's going to be constructed and completed. We're asking, when are you in design? When are you in tender? When are you in, those. So if everything was like, if there was nothing in those early columns, I'd be feeling a bit nervous. But I guess that's what I'm keeping an eye on, is to make sure there's kind of work in the pipeline, if you know what I mean. And so while we may not be hitting the construction and completion part, I know that there's work going on in those earlier stages. So I think that's, certainly the focus and why it's been good to have that level of reporting.
Look, and I agree. That's why I also agree with Mark that the project stage pie is probably the most critical diagram for us, because that's giving us a sense of the staging that we are at. So I appreciate that.
Your Worship.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. What is pleasing in here, Mark, is the Kakamutu Road wastewater 211,000 expenditure, where you came to council for 300,000. So yeah, that's quite pleasing to see. Only 2/3 of that request was spent.
I think one of the disappointing things, just going back to Kahuriko, is that the project that we're currently working on and seeking the extension for would make that water scheme compliant, wouldn't it? Which is the aim of the water reforms.
Again, which just is beyond belief that they'd actually stop that project going ahead.
I think she's giving you a note to take to the politicians, Your Worship. Bruce, did you have anything else?
No, that's fine. Thank you, Annette. Thank you for the chance to meet Mark and ask my questions.
So, sorry, Bruce. Meet Mark.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so we have the recommendation that the Risk and Assurance Committee receive the Capital Expenditure Delivery Risk Exposure Report from Mark Lewis, Group Manager, Engineering and Assets. Do I have a mover and a seconder?
Happy to move.
Thank you, Your Worship. Seconded, Councillor Jeffries. All in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. Now, so as part of our regular meetings, the chairman pointed out this morning, we would normally expect to have a public excluded session with the CE and the committee members. Do we want to do that as a process now, or close the meeting and hold that afterwards? Okay. Right, so we're just acknowledging for the minutes that we are doing that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kai. And I will declare the meeting closed at 3:31.
Recording stopped.